It was an ordinary house, or at least it seemed that way at first. The kind of house you might find in any suburban neighborhood, lined with other homes, neat gardens, and sidewalks that stretched into the distance. My name is Eric Williams, and I had moved into the old two-story house on Elm Street a few weeks ago, looking for a fresh start after a rough breakup. The house was inexpensive, a bit too large for a single guy, but it had a quiet charm, and I couldn't pass up the price. At first, I didn't pay much attention to the oddities of the house. It had that musty smell that old homes often have, the kind that lingers no matter how many candles you burn. The walls creaked, the floorboards groaned, and there was a draft that seemed to come from nowhere. But that was typical for a house built in the 1930s, right? Nothing out of the ordinary. But then came the door. It appeared in the wall one evening. I had been unpacking my things, sorting through boxes, and putting up some pictures. The house was quiet, and I was in the kitchen when I noticed something strange. A door. It wasn't there before. It hadn't been there when I moved in, and I was sure I would have noticed it. But now, there it was, right next to the staircase leading to the second floor. I froze, staring at it. It wasn't a large door, about the size of a closet door, with a simple brass handle and no markings. It was old, its wood worn, but it was undeniably there. It had no place in the house, as far as I could tell. It was positioned in the middle of the wall, and the wall around it looked completely undisturbed, as though no door had ever been there before. I walked over and tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I assumed it was either locked or perhaps stuck from age. I figured I'd deal with it later, maybe get someone to take a look at it. But when I turned back to the room, the air felt heavier, colder. I shook it off, told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But the next day, the door was slightly ajar. I'm not sure what made me notice it, but when I walked past the hallway, I saw it, the door, cracked open by a small gap, just wide enough to see the dark space behind it. I didn't remember leaving it open, and the thought that someone had entered without me noticing made my skin crawl. I walked over to it, heart pounding, and pushed the door open the rest of the way. It led to a small, dark room, barely big enough for a chair and a few shelves. The walls were bare, except for a thin layer of dust covering everything. The air smelled musty, as if the room hadn't been touched in years. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about it. But as I stepped inside, something about the room made my skin prickle. The atmosphere was thick, charged with something I couldn't place. The kind of feeling you get when you walk into a place that's been untouched for too long, as though time itself had stopped there. I closed the door and decided to ignore it for the time being. Maybe it was some kind of forgotten utility room, or a closet that had been sealed off for years. I tried to push the feeling aside. It was just an old house, and I was probably overthinking it. But then things started getting strange. That night, I woke up to the sound of something shifting, creaking in the house. It wasn't loud, just a faint scraping noise, but it was enough to jolt me awake. My room was dark, and the air felt unnaturally still. I listened, straining to hear where the noise was coming from. It was coming from the hallway, near the door. I got out of bed, heart racing, and cautiously walked down the hall. The door to the small room was open again. But this time, it was more than just slightly ajar. It was wide open. I walked toward it, my mind racing, wondering if I had left it open without realizing it. But I was sure I hadn't. I had made sure it was shut tight the night before. I stepped into the room, the cold air wrapping around me. The small space felt oppressive, as though the walls were closing in. I checked the shelves, the floor, the walls. There was nothing out of the ordinary. But then, I noticed something. There was a mark on the floor, a dark smudge that hadn't been there before. It was faint, almost as if something had been dragged across the room, leaving behind a trail of dirt or dust. I bent down to look at it, and that's when I heard the sound again. A low, guttural scrape, as if something was dragging along the floor behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Nothing had moved. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the sound of something scraping, something moving just out of my line of sight. The next day, I called a handyman to come look at the door, at the strange room, but when he arrived, the door was back to being completely sealed. No creaks, no signs of a recent opening. He inspected the wall and told me that there was nothing unusual about the structure. But I knew what I had seen. I knew what I had heard. The next night, I had the overwhelming urge to open the door again. Something was pulling me toward it, like an invisible force guiding my steps. I fought it, tried to ignore it, but by midnight, I couldn't stand it any longer. I grabbed the handle, and this time, it turned easily. The room was different. The shelves that had been empty before were now lined with old, dusty books, their spines cracked and yellowed. The floor was no longer bare. There was an old rug in the center of the room, stained and worn, with an intricate pattern that looked vaguely familiar, like something I had seen in an old family photo. I stepped inside, my breath shallow, and immediately, I felt it, the oppressive weight of the room. The air was thick with a feeling I couldn't describe. A sense of dread, of something wrong, something that didn't belong. I turned to leave, but as I did, I saw something in the corner of my eye, a figure. A shadow, just a glimpse, but it was enough. I froze, my heart racing. The shadow was gone in an instant, but I knew it had been there. I could feel it watching me, lurking just out of sight. That night, the door was wide open again when I woke up. And I could hear the scraping noise, louder now, more persistent, coming from the dark room across the hall. I haven't left the house yet, but I'm close. Every night, the door opens. Every night, something moves in the dark, something watching, waiting. I don't know what's behind that door, but I'm not sure I want to find out. I'm just afraid that soon, it'll find me.